ايوه. جنبنا كيف؟ Was your drive okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Shouldn't be, apart from some fuel issues.
أفلح من صلي على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين وضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم إلى أرواح المؤمنين الفاتحة.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد چہلم کو قتل گاہ میں جب آئے تھے بیبیاں سادات کربلا چہلم کو قتل گاہ میں جب آئے تھے بیبیاں سادات کربلا آگے بشیر پڑھتا تھا شارے بکا سادات کربلا نزدیک قتل گاہ میں جب پہنچا یہ قافلہ بولا بشیر نزدیک قتل گاہ میں جب پہنچا یہ قافلہ بولا بشیر اس جا پہ خیمے تھے میرے آقا کا جا بجا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا عابد نے جب سنی یہ خبر ہو کے دردناک کر کے گرے بچاک عابد نے جب سنی یہ خبر ہو کے دردناک کر کے گرے بچاک رو رو کے کہنے لگے اترو یہ ادب کی ہے جان سادات کربلا بے ہوش ہو کے گر پڑے اونٹوں سے بیبیاں عابد کی سن فگار بے ہوش ہو کے گر پڑے اونٹوں سے بیبیاں عابد کو سن فگار زینب پکاری بیٹا یہ جنگل ہے کون سا سادات کربلا عابد پکارے کیوں پھوپھی تم کو خبر نہیں یہ ہے وہی زمین عابد پکارے کیوں پھوپھی تم کو خبر نہیں یہ ہے وہی زمین بابا کو میرے قتل کیا گھر دیا جلا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا سنتے ہی گس جو آ گیا زینب کو ایک بار منہ پہ تماچے مار سنتے ہی گس جو آ گیا زینب کو ایک بار منہ پہ تماچے مار آنکھوں میں اشک لب پہ حسینہ کی تھی صدا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا سب اہل بیت روتے گئے قتل گاہ میں لاشوں کے ڈھونڈتے سب اہل بیت روتے ہیں قتل گاہ میں لاشے کو ڈھونڈتے ہر ایک بی بی لاش پہ بیٹھی جدا جدا سادات کربلا اصغر کی لاش پر گری بانو یہ شیر حسین اے میرے دل کو چین اصغر کی لاش پر گری بانو بشور حسین اے میرے دل کے چین اٹھو پیارے ماں سے لپٹ جاؤ تو ذرا سادات کربلا آگے تو مجھ کو دیکھ کر ہنس ہنس امکتے تھے ہاتھ اونچے کرتے تھے آگے تو مجھ کو دیکھ کر ہنس ہنس امکتے تھے ہاتھ اونچے کرتے تھے اب کیوں پڑا ہو خاک پہ اپنا چھندا گلا سادات کربلا रूठे हो मुझसे पानी के खातिर के दूध के, लो आओ कूद के। रूठे हो मुझसे पानी के खातिर के दूध के, लो आओ कूद के। तकसीर मेरी माफ करो मेरे दिल रुबा, सादात करबला। चेलुम को कतला गाँव में जब आए थे बीबिया, सादात करबला। आगे बशीर पढ़ता था आरए बुका, सादात करबला, सादात करबला। सलावत पर मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद। बीजू से
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
کربلا تعظیم کر، آئی بہن شبیر کی، کربلا تعظیم کر، آئی بہن شبیر کی، جا کے قدموں سے لپٹ، تو زینب دلگیر کی، قبر سے بے سر بہتر، تن اٹھے تعظیم کو، دیکھ اس استقبال کو، ہے فرات و شمشیر بھی، قید سے چھٹ کر ہے آتا، قافلہ زوار کا، پوچھ لے ان سے ستم، زندان کے جاگیر کا، کالے محمل میں ہے بیٹھی، بیویاں سب دکھ جھلی، داغوں سے چھلنی جگر ہے، شاہ کے नन्ही सी तुरबत ये असगर की छुपा लेकर भला क्या तड़पना सुन सकोगे मादरे बेशीर का मादरे अकबर भी आती है कलेजा थाम कर वो गिला किससे करे रूठी हुई तकदीर की तुम सकीना खो ना ढूंढो तुरबते अब्बास पर रह गई है शाम में वो लाडली शबीर की करबला ताज़ीम कर आई बहन शबीर की जाके कदमों से लिपट तू ज़ैनबे दिलगीर की
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. جزاك الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On this night where we commemorate the Eid of Arba'een, we extend our condolences firstly to the Imam of our time and to all of the Mu'mineen as we commemorate the martyrdom of Abu Abdullah and the various events and calamities that befell the household of Imam Hasnain alayhi salam. Mu'mineen, can I please request the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha for the Tabarruk on all Marhumeen and Marhumat, Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha. Mu'mineen, I would like to take this opportunity to encourage you on this holy night to consider making a donation towards the fund for the Safar programs. Our target for the Safar funds is £3,500. Of this amount, we have currently raised £1,085. Mu'mineen, your generosity is greatly appreciated in helping us to continue and further the mission of Abu Abdullah Hasnain alayhi salam. To make a donation, please see the links that have been circulated by email, or alternatively, please speak to myself or Brother Jamil Bandari. Mu'mineen, over the last few nights, we have been Sheikh Hasnain Govani, who has been delivering his series of Majlis on the topic obstacles to integrity. Tonight will inshallah be his final lecture of the series, and I'm sure you will all agree the Majlis have been very relevant, very useful for us all, and we have all learnt vast amounts from this. Can I please ask, as we welcome Sheikh for the final Majlis in this series, that we show our acknowledgement and appreciation with the recitation of 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين خالق السماوات والأرضين. الحمد لله الذي بعث أنبياءه بالحق والهدى ثم ختمهم بحبيبه المصطفى. الحمد لله الذي جعل إكمال ديننا وإتمام نعمته بولاية المرتضى. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه وقوله الحق بعد نقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد وآل محمد. Sheikh, my elders, brothers and sisters in Iman and Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we have now approached the night of Arba'een, I would like to commence with extending my condolences to the mu'mineen present, to those all over the earth, and to the Ahlul Bayt specifically, and amongst them Imam al-Hujjah, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu al-Sharif. As we are reliving those grievous memories, and we keep in mind that as we are remembering these events, then there are those who saw the events or who are presented with the events, although they did not see them, but it is for them as if they saw them. And so we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He always keeps the memory of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in our hearts, and those who have gone to Karbala for Arba'een, that Allah keeps them safe and returns them safe to their homes, and that Allah next year allows us to be amongst those who can be in Karbala, inshallah. Ahibba'i, we have been discussing from the Quran and the Sunnah certain things that when we look at the history of Islam, when we look at the psychology of human beings, we find that although human beings do value integrity, do value the concept of integrity, meaning that our actions should be aligned with our thoughts, with our values, we find that there are certain things that happen in our lives, certain challenges that we might have, that makes us go against our own values. So these become obstacles to integrity. Yesterday we mentioned that the pleasures of dunya, the lure of dunya could be among such things that makes us go against our own integrity. So that when we are presented, for example, with things that will give us pleasure, we will then say that, okay, whatever integrity, whatever values I have, I will sacrifice these values because of the seeking of pleasure, or because of wanting to remain aloof from fear of pain. So we see that if I uphold my values in this certain circumstance, I will then cause myself pain, and therefore I will opt to sacrifice my values, but I will remove away from pain. And we saw that in Karbala, there were people who were of these categories, people who wanted to seek dunya, or people who wanted to remain away from fear, pain, because out of fear. And we said that Islam encourages everything in moderation, and we said moderation is of different types depending on the situation. You cannot say that because moderation is something in one situation, therefore the same thing applies for everything. And we gave you a simple example that salt and sugar, you have to have both in moderation, but both is not the equal, both are not equal when we talk about moderation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then, He describes certain people in Surah Al-Hijr. He says that amongst people, there are people that, they are so disinterested in knowing about anything beyond this dunya. They will only realize when they stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. So in verse number 2 and 3, God says, رُبَّمَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ كَانُوا مُسْلِمِينَ. Perhaps a day will come that those who are now doing kufr, they will wish that they were Muslims, meaning that they submitted to the will of God. But their state now, in the next verse Allah describes, their state now is what? ذَرْهُمْ يَأْكُلُوا وَيَتَمَتَّعُوا وَيُلْهِهِمُ الْأَمَلِ. Leave them, allow them to be right now. They eat, the only thing that they do, or the only business that they have in this dunya right now is to eat and to enjoy and to be occupied with amal. Amal, not amal. This is one of the great fascinations with Arabic language, that you choose to just switch one letter, and these letters are very close to each other sometimes, that you just choose one letter, you switch one letter to another letter, and the meaning becomes opposite. Amal means action. When we act, we say, for example, in the month of Ramadan, we do amal. It's not amal, it's amal. But these are the actions that we do. These are the things that we do to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All our prayers, all our fasting, all of these things are a'mal, with ayn. Amal is hope. Amal is hope. And even in Dua Prophet Imam Ali, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, he says that we become preoccupied with our amal, with our hopes. So because we have so high hopes on dunya, we hope to achieve a lot of things in dunya. Many of us have high hopes on dunya that we forget to have high hopes for akhirah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us only to have amal, especially not for dunya. As I said, we should have ambitions to make this world a better place, to provide for ourselves, to provide for our families. But our hopes should be for akhirah. But not in the sense that we say that we only have hopes, in the sense that we act. The amal that we have for akhirah has to be accompanied, whether it be for akhirah or for dunya, the amal, the hope that we have has to go hand in hand with amal. Amal without amal is worthless. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, there are people, yulhihimul amal, they are preoccupied with just hopes. They have high hopes for this dunya. So God says, Dharhum, leave them, ya'kulu wa yatamatta'u. The only business they have, the only thing they know, the only desire they have is to eat, enjoy, and have these high hopes. فَسَوْفَ يَعْلَمُونَ. God says, one day they will come to know. Now, this dunya, therefore, we find is a place where we are to make preparations for the next life. And pleasures can be a part of it, but it is not the most important part of their life. Please recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In Riwayah Amir al-Mu'minin says, قَلَّ مَنْ غَرِيَ بِاللَّذَّاتِ إِلَّا كَانَ بِهَا هَلَاكُهُ. He says, very few people you will find, very few are those who are seduced by their desires, but then they are not destroyed by them. So desires we are to enjoy. Allah said, I want to remind us again. Yesterday we said, God has said that He's brought out the zina, the beauties of this world for us. There's no doubt about that. But when we become seduced by the laddat, by the enjoyments of this dunya, then that will lead to our destruction. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Furqan, أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you not seen the one who has taken his desire as God? You see, I used to, and sometimes we might think about this, the Quran emphasizes so much on Tawheed. The strongest emphasis in the Quran is on Tawheed, that you worship only one God. And we might ask ourselves, then why is God so preoccupied with this thought that we should worship only Him? And then there might be several reasons. I'm just reflecting upon this. And I looked into history, and I looked into the way that people who worship different gods, in what way do they worship different gods? Why do they worship different gods? What are these different gods that they worship? So you will find that they would, for example, they would have one god for rain. They would have one god for crops. They would have one god for business. They would have one God for having children. They would have one God for feeding them. They would all the different desires that they have in this world, they would have a God for that. They wouldn't have God, either it is the desire that they have or it is the fear that they have. One God that is the God of death, for example. That God you have to somehow try to please so that He doesn't take you. And you have one God that is there to give you more money. So that God you have to please so that He will give you more money. One God that is for marriages, so you please that God will give you a nice spouse, inshallah. And this was the way that they used to think. You look into different types of religions, this is the way that you would consider what the different gods are for. This is when we realize that when God says you should worship only one God, because when you have these different gods, you are worshipping your desires. These desires become the things that you are worshipping. Whereas when you worship only one God, now you're worshipping only truth. There's only one thing that you worship, which is the absolute truth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about these people who are worshipping their desires, who take their desires as God, He says, إِنْهُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ. They are like cattle. Because their business in the world is what? Just enjoying this world. In a riwayah, Amir al-Mu'minin says, Al-Jahilu abdu shahwati. He says the Jahil is the one who is the servant of his shahwa, of his desire. He becomes a worshipper of his desire. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is reported to have said, ما تحت ظل السماء من إله يعبد من دون الله أعظم عند الله من هوى متبع. He says there is no God that is being worshipped under the skies that is worse in the sight of God, that God finds more despicable other than a hawa and than a desire that is being followed, for the desire that is being acted upon. Why is it that we need to be so careful with these desires? See, again, we said yesterday that we have to distinguish between well-being and desires. Well-being is something we should strive for. Desire is something we should be careful for. But the world that we live in today have conflated these two issues. So the world that we live in today, they present desires as well-being. You know, there's a famous brand, and I'm not trying to ruin any names, but you know, there's a brand saying, just do it. And when it comes to being successful in the world, yes, just do it. But this just do it becomes the motto for everything. Anything you desire, just do it. Don't think about it. Don't even consider whether this is good or bad. Just do it. There's a professor or a doctor in the US called his name is Dr. Robert Lustig. He has written a book called The Hacking of the American Mind. So he's a medical doctor. He's writing about how the American mind, and when he's being interviewed, he says this is not just about the American mind. This is about the British mind, the Canadian mind, the Swedish mind, any in the world today, any nationality, this is the way that big business has hacked the minds of people. He says, how have they hacked the mind of people? He says they have hacked the minds of people by convincing them that happiness, so the word that we use for well-being, he is calling that happiness is the very same thing as pleasure. So by engaging in pleasure, you will have happiness. He says they are not the same thing. And he gives a list of the differences between happiness and between between pleasure. Now, the basics, he says, happiness, one of the main things you have to understand to differentiate between these is that happiness is driven by serotonin. When it comes to our hormones, it is serotonin driven, whereas pleasure is driven by dopamine. I'm not going to have a medical class here to explain to you what is the difference between serotonin and dopamine. I know half of you are pharmacists, at least half of you. Others are doctors. You know, there's this famous story of Mullah Nasruddin. Again, I'm not going to tell the story, but when he's asked to give a lecture, in the third time when he goes up, he says, those of you who know what I'm going to speak about, tell those who don't know what I'm going to speak about, right? So those of you who are pharmacists and doctors, you can later on, you can tell the difference between dopamine and serotonin to the others. I'm not going to go through that. I wouldn't make any sense anyway. But in any case, he says now, that's one of the very important differences, that pleasure is driven by dopamine, whereas happiness is driven by serotonin. Pleasure is short-lived. Think about it. When you have a cake, if you're a smoker, when you have a cigarette, if you have any other pleasure-driven in your life, anything that you do for pleasure in your life, it is very short-lived. You will enjoy it in the moment, but it will not last. Whereas happiness is long-lived. Pleasure is visceral. It's in the body. Happiness is ethereal. It is in the mind. He says pleasure is in taking. You have to get something. You have to put something in your body. Whereas happiness is in giving. It's in sharing. He says pleasure can be achieved with substances. Happiness cannot be achieved with substances. If you think that any substance that you take is going to make you happy, that is wrong. It is only, it's giving you pleasure, but it is not giving you happiness. He says pleasure can be experienced alone. Happiness is usually experienced in social groups. That's his understanding. We know, of course, the best social group that we have is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innal qulub." And Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, says in a riwayah that if I were to be left all alone, everyone in the east and the west has left me and I'm all alone, as long as I have the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will never be alone. As long as I have the dhikr of Allah, I'm not alone. And anyway, and he says, the last thing he says is the extreme, and this is what we want to concentrate on today. Time is of the essence. I don't have that much time left, but this is what we'll concentrate on during the time that is left. He says the extremes of pleasure all lead to addiction. The extremes of pleasure all lead to addiction, whether they are substance or behaviors, but there is no such thing as being addicted to too much happiness. Have you ever heard anyone say that I'm addicted to happiness? Happiness has caused me troubles in my life. So what we need to be careful is that pleasures, again, we are to enjoy the good things of the world, but when they become extreme, when we become immoderate in our pleasures of dunya, they lead to addictions. Now, Imam Ali, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, warns us. He warns us, he says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَغَلَبَةِ الشَّهَوَاتِ. He says, be careful so that your desires don't own you, they don't overcome you, they are not victorious. عَلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ, over your hearts. فَإِنَّ بِدَايَتَهَا مَلَكَ. In the beginning, they will become your rulers, you will be slaves of them. وَنِهَايَتُهَا هَلَكَ. And towards the end, it is your ruin. In this will be your ruin, if you allow your pleasures to overcome you. See, the way pleasures work is that they give you a stimuli. Well, for example, ask anyone who is a smoker, that when they smoke, there's some kind of a stimuli. They feel some sense of enjoyment. When you eat, for example, when you eat sugar, there's an enjoyment in that. There are other things that you do in life that's a stimuli. Even playing sports, and I'm not saying it is bad, but sports, there's a different hormone involved. So it is, but there is a stimulus. You have an enjoyment, you have a pleasure in that. Now, after you become accustomed to that stimuli, your neurons are no longer responding to the same level of stimuli. Your neurons, meaning the connectors in the brain, where the messages are going in the brain, where the dopamine is going from one level to another, one neuron to another, they need more and more. Ask any smoker, when you started out smoking, did you start out smoking with a pack of cigarettes a day, or did you start out smoking with taking just a few, what do they call it in English? I just lost the word. Puffs. A few puffs a day. Did you start with a few puffs a day, or did you start with a package a day? I started with a few puffs a day, and then I went on to having more and more and more. Because our neurons are becoming adapted to the stimuli that they are getting. Same way with sugar, same way with drugs, same way with alcohol, anything that people derive enjoyment from. As the brain becomes accustomed to the stimuli, we now need more and more and more. The problem is that the body is not becoming accustomed. The brain is becoming accustomed, the body is not. So why do people, for example, when they smoke, I'm sorry if any smoker is getting offended, I don't mean to offend you, but this is a very easy at hand example. Why is it that when people smoke, some people will get different types of diseases out of smoking? Because the body is not getting adjusted. The body is getting more and more poison and doesn't know how to deal with this. Same thing with sugar. For some people, they will develop diabetes. Why? Because the body is not adopting. The brain might be adopting. And you know the thing, if you present a person who is accustomed to eating a lot of sugar, so now I'm getting to the people eating sugar, so we leave the smokers alone. If you accustom the body to eating too much sugar, now you present them with fruit and they'll say, "What? This fruit isn't nice, there's no sweetness in the fruit." Whereas a person who is not accustomed to eating sugar, you give them fruit and they find the fruit to be very sweet. Because again, our brains have become used to what we call not just normal stimuli, now we need hypernormal stimuli or supernormal stimuli. And the more stimuli we need, the more the higher the addiction gets. Now, addiction is not only to substances, addiction is also to behavior. So we spoke about social media, the perils of social media. 2 nights ago, we spoke about how social media can affect us, how it can ruin marriages, how it can ruin your own sense of confidence and so forth. You look at all these people who are constantly being very happy, very joyous, presenting their lives, and you only see one side of the coin. There are people who will actually rent cars for the day or rent houses for the day, present it on social media as this is what I have achieved. I am earning so much money. I'm so successful. They'll take the whole day. They'll spend time taking photos, and then during the year they'll put up one picture after another picture after another picture, and you're sitting there, you're thinking, I wish I was this successful, or I wish my wife would take me on this journey. I wish my husband would take me on this journey, and so forth and so forth. This is just fake news. But social media is a stimuli. Social media is a stimuli that we become addicted to, and therefore, the more we get of it, the more we need. The habit becomes, the more we need. No, not only social media. There are things on the internet, on your mobile phones, that as parents you might be surprised. When I was young, they used to say that do not keep computers in the room of your children because you don't know what they will access. Today, you don't need any computer. You don't need a laptop or a desktop. Today, on the mobile phone, there are certain things that, because of the ihtiram of the member, I cannot go into details, but do not be surprised if you find out that there are people in the community who are addicted to these things. It is very easy because addiction comes out of different things. Sometimes addiction comes because people go through trauma, but other times addiction comes because they are opportunity induced. If there's an opportunity, for example, think about people who get, again, this is a common example, People who become addicted to cigarettes, when did they start smoking? Most people, they started smoking maybe 13, 14, 15 years of age. There's a social environment that is allowing, a social environment that might even encourage smoking back in the days, not today at least, but back in the days, they used to encourage smoking. It's cool, it's stuff, you'll be in the crew. So smoking used to be encouraged by the social environment. And then you find that there is ease of access. If there is ease of access, you become used to that, you pick that habit up. Similarly, there are other things now that are easy at hand. People become used to those things. And so we need to have conversations with our children, with our community members about these things, because these things will keep us prisoners. These things will own us. In today's society, remember the example we said yesterday, that just because something is normal or something is natural doesn't mean that it is good. It was normal to smoke cigarettes 50 years ago. Doesn't mean necessarily that it is good. Other things today are presented to us as normal. Kids will be curious. Why are you trying to stop them from their curiosity? Why are you trying to stop them from exploring the world? But it is not healthy. These things might be normal, but that doesn't make it healthy. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And it is important to start with this training from a young age. Imam Ali writes, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. He writes to his son. So this is to his own son, he's writing this. He says that when I notice that I'm getting of old age and I might not be able to impart knowledge, this is in Nahjul Balagha. He says, I hastened with my will for you and wrote down my prominent points, my advice that I wanted to give you in case death overtakes me before I tell you what is in my heart. I'm summarizing what he's saying. Or in case my wit be affected and my body has been affected. Or forces of passion. So first he says, I might be afflicted by something. Now he's saying, or forces of passion or mischief of the world overtake you. So either I be affected and I cannot impart my knowledge, or no, the world is so strongly affecting you that it overtakes you and it makes you like a stubborn camel. Imam Ali is telling his own son that the world might make you like a stubborn camel. Therefore, I want to give you some advice. Certainly, the heart of a young man is like uncultivated land. It accepts whatever is put into it. So I hasten to mold you properly before your heart hardened up and your mind became occupied. Why am I retelling this specific hadith from Imam Ali, this specific letter? The conversations that we need to have with our children cannot start at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, when we start discovering that they have problems. When we start discovering that they have hormones. The conversation needs to start at a very young age. Appropriate to the age. But the conversation needs to be started at a young age, because you do not realize what they are being exposed to outside of the home. You do not realize what they're being exposed to at school, with their friend circles, on social media. So the conversations needs to be started very early. And Amir al-Mu'mineen says, if Amir al-Mu'mineen's son can be at risk to becoming like a stubborn camel, then what about our children? So we need to have that in mind. Recite one more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says in another riwayah, he says that take charge of the discipline of yourselves and shift them away from habits. What we call addictions, Arabic, he's using the word aada, addiction is a modern word, but he says shift away your soul from habits. And Imam Hassan says, al-aadatu qahirat. He says habits are overpowering. Why? فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى شَيْئًا فِي سِرِّهِ وَخَلَاوَتِهِ فَفَضَحَهُ فِي عَلَانِيَتِهِ وَعِنْدَ الْمَلَأِ. He says, whosoever forms a habit in secret, these habits that he has in secret and his loneliness, they will overpower him, and sooner or later they will become exposed amongst people. Do not think, yes, Allah covers so many of our sins. Allah will cover the sins that we do in secret. Allah is very merciful. But once these sins become a part of our habit, it will become very difficult to hide them from people. Sooner or later, they might come out, and at that point, it will be very difficult to hide them. Imam Ali says, لِسَانُكَ يَسْتَدْعِيكَ مَا عَوَّدْتَ. He says, your tongue will urge you to whatever you have accustomed it to. So if you have accustomed it to use foul language, for example, your tongue will sooner or later will expose you. And he says, your inner self, وَنَفْسُكَ, will require you to do whatever you have made it fond of. Whatever you have made it in habitual, whatever habits you have made it fond of, your inner self will require it from you. It will ask you that, I want this, please continue doing this. So habits is one of those things that we need to be very careful for, because habits are overpowering and it will drive us away from the path of integrity. It is one of those things that once we have a certain habit has become a part of us, when we face challenges where we have to stand up, where we want to be true to our values, it will be very difficult. Not to mention the consequences it will have in our life, where it's not a matter of integrity, but it is a matter of health, it is a matter of relationships, it is a matter of how we engage with other people. All these things will also be affected, not just integrity. So these are things that we need to keep in mind. We have hadith that mentions that breaking a habit is very difficult. Some hadith saying almost it is impossible. Doesn't mean it is impossible, because other hadith says that the best thing you can do for yourself is to break your bad habits. Now, a piece of advice. If you want to break a bad habit, if you want to break an addiction, so a piece of advice before we end the majlis and we go to the masa'ib. Psychologists will tell us that we human beings, we get afflicted by something called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue means that we become tired of making decisions time upon time, when we have to make more and more decisions. So for example, if you want to, they say, for example, just to give an example, that if you want to become a runner, if you want to pick up running, and you say that, okay, every day after work, at the end of the day, after I come home, I will start running. I will go out for a run. They say, it's good, you want to start running, it's good, but don't put that pressure on you at the end of the day. Why? Because during the day you have made so many decisions that when you come home, you are already tired of making decisions during the day, that at that time you come home, you're tired, you see the food, you see the sofa, you see the telly, you say, okay, I'll go running tomorrow. Because you have to make decisions, and you have decision fatigue. So how do you train your decision muscle, so to say? So one way to train your decision muscle, Islam has taught us, is by staying hungry. How? Fasting. Fasting is one of the best ways to train that decision muscle. If you fast, we have hadith, for example, that says, Imam Ali says, نِعْمَ الْعَوْنُ عَلَىٰ أَصْرِ النَّفْسِ وَكَسْرِ عَادَتِهَا التَّجَوُّدُ. He says the best help for against to keep your soul in check and breaking the habit is to keep hungry. Hunger is one of the best opportunities. And Ramadan, therefore, is one of the best opportunities to train our decision muscle. It's not a muscle, I hope you understand, I'm using metaphors. Another way, which the psychologists will tell us, is that you make your... Have you seen Mark Zuckerberg? I'm not promoting Facebook. You know me by now, that I'm not promoting that. But have you seen the type of clothes he wears? Normally, you'll find him in a t-shirt and jeans or something, right? Even Steve Jobs, that he passed away, of course, but you used to see him, he always used to wear a black polo. That's standard. Normally, he used to wear a black polo. Why is that? Why is it that some people, you will always, is it they only own one piece of cloth? No, that's not the deal. The thing is that they have discovered that when they want to make, the more decisions they make, the more tired they become. It is easier, the less decisions they have to make during the day, the easier life will become. So they don't want to put extra strain in the life. Now, I'm not saying that you limit your wardrobe to one piece of clothing. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that when you want to break a habit, you list the times that you find that it's a challenge to break the habit. When the habit actually reminds itself to you, and you decide already from before, how am I going to face this challenge? How am I going to break the habit? What am I going to do? You decide already now. So for example, again, you go back to smoking. You decided that you want to give up smoking. How do you go about decide to go break the habit of smoking? You have already decided today. Did the sound disappear? Okay. You have already decided today that tomorrow, I thought maybe they're telling me it's time to finish and you have to. You have already decided that you put a list down that if I feel the urge for smoking, I will go out for a walk. Or if I feel the urge for smoking, I will eat an apple. Or if I feel the urge for smoking, I will go on my prayer run. And if you already make decisions that if I want to do this, I will do this. Why do you have to decide this beforehand? Because you don't get decision fatigue. You already made up your mind that when the addiction makes itself known, this is what I will do to break the habit. This is what I will do to overcome the habit. Inshallah, if we follow this advice, and inshallah you don't have these problems. I pray that in Wessex community, the mu'mineen don't have these problems, but you need to be vigilant because these problems, some of the things that I mentioned, not just sugar and smoking, other things as well. Sugar is an addiction as well that you need to be careful with. But we'll leave that discussion for another day, inshallah. If I come back, if you allow me to come back, inshallah, after this, then maybe we can discuss that. It is very important that we make use of these opportunities that we have. In Imam Ali says, Al-fadilatu ghalabatul aada. He says, fadila, virtue is in overcoming your habits. Virtue is in overcoming your habits. And in another riwayah, afdalul ibada ghalabatul aada. The best ibadah you can do, the best worship you can do is to overcome your habits. People who are not successful in overcoming their habits, you will find them that it is easier for them to go against their own values. Once you overcome your habits, it is easier. So yesterday we spoke about pleasures. Pleasures as such, we recap, pleasures as such are not something necessarily bad, but everything that is halal is to be enjoyed in moderation. If it is not in moderation, as Imam Hussein said on the plains of Karbala, you have consumed so much haram that now when the Imam is preaching to you, it doesn't have any effect on you. You are not listening, you are not paying attention. When those haram things not only become something that we feel are happy with, feel our stomachs with, meaning we consume, but when they become a part of us, a part of who we are, a part of our identity. You know, you say, you don't say a person is smoking, you say the person is a smoker. That says something about smoking, that it's not just a habit, it's an identity now. When something becomes, and please forgive me if anyone is a smoker, I don't mean to put you down. I'm just giving, because it's a very easy example to give. So once something becomes a habit, it becomes a part of your identity. Once something becomes a part of your identity, you really, really, really need to make it a priority to break that habit. And I'm saying this first and foremost to myself before I'm saying this to anyone else. Ahibai, we want to move towards Karbala. Yesterday we mentioned how the caravan came towards Karbala after leaving Damascus, and how Lady Zainab came to the grave of her brother, and how she must have felt grief at that point when she comes to the grave of her brother and is telling her brother that I could not take care of your daughter. I tried my very best, but your daughter was left in the prison of Damascus. The narration says that at one point Lady Zainab, she started to look towards right and left. And they said, what are you looking for? And she said, I want to go to the grave of Abbas. So Imam Zainul Abidin takes his sister to the grave of Abbas. Now, I have not read what she says on the grave of Abbas, but lisan al-hal, I'm thinking, maybe she says that my brother, I was calling you in the streets of Kufa and Damascus. Abbas, where were you when they were taking my hijab away from me? Abbas, where were you when Ibn Ziyad was addressing me? Abbas, where were you when Yazid was talking with me? Abbas, where were you when Sukaina was crying after you? And I think to myself what Imam Sajjad must have said. Perhaps he said, Abbas, my uncle Abbas, you were protective of the women. I also had this protectiveness. But my uncle Abbas, you sacrificed your arms, then you rested near Furat. Uncle Abbas, I had to see my sisters and aunts running from one burning tent to another burning tent. I had to see the veils being snatched from their heads. My uncle Abbas, I had to see them being paraded through the cities of Kufa and Sham. My uncle Abbas, I had to see them standing in front of Yazid and Ibn Ziyad. My uncle Abbas, I had to see them being paraded like prisoners are being paraded. The narration says that after a few days, Imam Sajjad decided we have to leave this place. Perhaps he feared that death would overtake them. At that point, one of the daughters of Imam Hussein, she throws herself on the grave of Hussein. She says, "Ala ya Karbala, nudi'uka jisman bila kafnin wala ghuslin dafina." She says, "Oh Karbala, we are leaving, but when we are leaving Karbala, we are leaving a body here that got no ghusl and no kafan. And this is a body whose head was taken in the streets of Kufa and Damascus." As they leave Karbala, I do not know how Lady Zainab bids farewell to Imam Hussein. I do not know how Rabab says farewell to that young child that she had left in Karbala. But the caravan then moves towards Medina. As the caravan approaches Medina, Imam Sajjad calls upon the Bashir, who is there to accompany them on the road. He says, "Bashir, your father used to say some poetry. Are you a poet as well?" So Bashir says, "I do say some poetry." So he says, "Then please go towards Medina and announce to them that we have come." So Bashir goes towards Medina. He says, "Ya ahla yathriba la muqama lakum. لا مقام لكم بها قتل الحسين." He says, "Oh people of Medina, there is no reason to stay in Medina anymore. Medina is not worthy of staying." Why? Because the apple of the eye of the people of Medina, Hussein, has been killed. His body is in Karbala, but the head was paraded towards the streets of Kufa and Damascus. At that point, the narration says that a lady came out. She had a young child in her arm. As she comes out towards Bashir, she says, "Oh Bashir, what are you saying? What news are you bringing?" So Bashir, he inquires, "Who is this lady?" So they tell her that the lady is Baneen. Bashir looks towards Baneen. He is now wondering, how should I break the news to this lady? So she says, "Oh Baneen, may God reward you greatly for your son Uthman." He says, "I did not ask you about Uthman. I asked you about my son Hussein." He says, Baneen, may God reward you greatly for your son Abdullah. He says, "I did not ask you about Abdullah. But tell me about Hussein." Again, he says, Baneen, may God reward you greatly for your son Ja'far. She says, "I did not ask you about Ja'far. Tell me about Hussein." He says, Baneen, may God reward you greatly for your patience and your grief over your son Abbas. She says, "You have broken my heart by mentioning my sons. But all my sons, may they be sacrificed for Hussein. What are the news of Hussein?" He says, "Hussein has been killed. May God give you great reward for your patience over the grief of Hussein." At that point, she starts crying over Hussein. One narration says that when she found out that Hussein had been killed, she says, "How can Hussein be killed when my Abbas is alive?" So she was told that Abbas had been killed. She asked, "How is Abbas killed?" They said, in deceit, they cut off his arms, and then they shot an arrow in him, and they hit him on his head, and he fell to the ground. So she says that if that is true, I believe Hussein was killed. Then she says, "Answer me this. When someone is sitting on the horse, when a rider is sitting on his horse, and he falls to the ground, he uses his arms to protect him from the fall. If they cut the arms of my Abbas, how did Abbas fall to the ground of Karbala? I will say, Badeen, if you had seen Zainab with her hands, or rope with her hands, falling on the ground of Karbala towards the body of Hussein, you would not ask about Abbas, you would ask about Zainab. The narration says that the Ahlul Bayt stayed outside Medina. The people of Medina then went towards the tents that were put outside of Medina. Muhammad al-Hanafiya, when he heard that the caravan has returned, he said, I am like Yaqub and my Yusuf has returned to me. And he hurries towards the tents, but when he sees the black flags, he says, I am Yaqub, but my Yusuf has not returned. Imam Sajjad, that when the people of Medina has gathered, he gives a sermon. He says, no, O people, we have been tried. Allah has tried us. People have been put us through suffering. Had the Prophet told the people that they should put us through suffering, not that they should love us. Know that there is no suffering left that they did not put us through. They put us through so much different types of suffering. When Muhammad al-Hanafiya, who wants to embrace his nephew, Imam Sajjad says, my uncle, do not touch me, because the chains have been putting so much strain on my body, and the whips have put me so much strain on my back, that there is so much pain in my body that I cannot bear anyone touching me. Ahibai, when the Ahlul Bayt finally, when they return towards Medina, when they come back towards Medina, Kulthum, the lady Kulthum, she starts reciting. She says, Ya Madina tu jaddina la tuqbalina. Oh, the Medina of our grandfather, do not accept us, do not welcome us back. We left with the whole haram, but we return and there are no men and no sons with us. The narration says that the two sisters then go towards the mosque of Rasulullah. One of them opens the gates of Rasulullah's grave. She holds the doors and she says, Ya Rasulullah, we bring the news of the death of Hussein. The other one throws herself on the grave of Rasulullah and she says, we bring the news of the death of Hussein. Then I did not read, but Lisanul Hal, I say, she must have said, oh grandfather, had it not been that people are watching us, I would have shown you where they put the ropes on my arms. I would have shown you where they put whips on our backs. I would have shown you how they used to slap us. Ya Rasulullah. And then I wonder when Lady Zainab finally goes towards the grave of Lady Fatima, how she goes to the grave of Lady Fatima. What does she tell Fatima to Zahra? Does she tell Fatima that, oh mother, when Hussein was going out for the last time, I kissed his neck as you had asked me. Oh mother, I saw Hussein on the grounds of Karbala, 70 feet away. I was there. Hussein was being slaughtered. Oh mother, I saw my Asghar being killed. Oh mother, I saw Akbar being killed. Oh mother, I saw Abbas riding out. I saw the flag falling down. I did not see the flag coming back. Oh mother, I saw so many difficulties. And perhaps she said, I might just listen to this Azadaro and just listen to this and then you cry. And she might have said, mother, you went to a court. Mother, I went to a court. Mother, when you went to the court, you had your hijab on your head. Mother, when I went to the court, there was no hijab. Mother, when you went to the court, and the Hashimiyat was surrounding you. Mother, when I went to the court, there was no one surrounding me. Mother, when you went to the court, and they were the companions of Rasulullah. Mother, when I went to the court, they were the drunkards who had killed my brother. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعليها وبني وسر المستودع فيها. والله accept our أعمال. والله increase our توفيقات. والله make us amongst the lovers of Hussein in dunya and akhirah. Oh Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Hussein in Dunya and the vicinity of Hussein in Akhirah. Oh Allah, grant us the shifa of Hussein. Oh Allah, we are sinners, but we are not sinners like those who slept together. We are not sinners like those who would rape ladies. Oh Allah, keep us away from the enemies of Hussein. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah. Oh Allah, join us with the close associates of Imam al-Hujjah. Oh Allah, whenever we see oppression around the world, oh Allah, allow us to be amongst those who remove oppression around the world. And let us be true to the covenant that we have made with Allah and with the Ahlul Bayt. Matam Hussein.
سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہلم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہلم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہلم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا ایک بی بی دشت خونی میں جاتی تھی نہر پر کہتی با چشم تر کہتی با چشم تر عباس دینے آئی ہوں پرسا سکینہ کا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہلم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا گچ گچ کے لاڈلی تیری زندہ میں مر گئی تربت نہیں بنی تربت نہیں بنی بھیا وہ قید سے نہ ہوئی مر کے بھی جدا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہلم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا
اکبر کی قبر پر یوں ہوئی لیلا نوحگر دیکھا نہ سال بھر دیکھا نہ سال بھر آئی ہو قید شام سے اب ہو کہ میرے سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہے تم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا بانو یہ بین کرتی تھی یہ میرے بے زباں ماں ڈھونڈ اب کہاں ماں ڈھونڈ اب کہاں بتلا دے ہے کہاں میرا اصغر کربلا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا چہے تم کو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا قربان تیرے میرے مادائے بے وطن مجبور تھی بہن مجبور تھی بہن زندہ میں مجھ سے تیری امانت ہوئی جدا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا تم تو کربلا میں جب آئی وہ بیبیا سادات کربلا سادات کربلا یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع اپنی نسلوں کو سکھاتے رہو ماتم کا ہنر سینہ در سینہ کرے بس یہ عزاداری سفر جیسے حالات بھی ہوں رسم یہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع لاکھ بدلے یہ زمانے کی روش اور موسم ہے کہ پل بھی نہ رکے اشک عزا اور ماتم ماتم شہ کا جنون ذہن پر تاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع تم مگر ذاکر شبیر ہو یہ یاد رہے، چاہے اس غم کے لیے سر بھی کٹے گر بھی جلے، حرمت فرش عزا آئے جان سے پیاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے یہ سبیلے یوں ہی آباد رہے لے عزا، اور گر گر پہ نظر آئے علم غازی کا، یہ علم اونچا رہے یہ علم داری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے اپنے گھر میں بھی عزاخانہ سجانا ہے مجھے، اپنے بچوں کو عزادار بنانا ہے مجھے، تاکہ اس نسل میں بھی تازیہ جاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے، شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے، ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے۔
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على ولي الله وحبيبه، السلام على خليل الله ونجيبه، السلام على صفي الله وابن صفيه، السلام على الحسين المظلوم، السلام على الحسين المظلوم الشهيد، السلام على أسير الكربات وقتيل العبرات. اللهم إني أشهد أنه وليك وابن وليك وصفيك وابن صفيك الفائز بكرامتك، أكرمته بالشهادة وحبوته بالسعادة واجتبيته بطيب الولادة وجعلته سيدا من السادة وقائدا من القادة وذائدا من الدادة وأعطيته مواريث الأنبياء وجعلته حجة على خلقك من الأوصياء، فأعذر في الدعاء ومنح النصح وبذل مهجته فيك ليستنقذ عبادك من الجهالة وحيرة الضلالة، وقد توازر عليه من غرته الدنيا وباع حظه بالأرض للأدنى وشرى آخرته بالثمن الأوكس وتغطرس وتردى في هواه وأسخطك وأسخط نبيك وأطاع من عبادك أهل الشقاق والنفاق وحملة الأوزار المستوجبين النار، فجاهدهم فيك صابرا محتسبا حتى سفك في طاعتك دمه واستبيح حريمه. اللهم فلعنهم لعنا وبيلا وعذبهم عذابا أليما. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الأوصياء، أشهد أنك أمين الله وابن أمينه، عشت سعيدا ومضيت حميدا ومت فقيدا مظلوما شهيدا، وأشهد أن الله منجز ما وعدك ومهلك من خذلك ومعذب من قتلك، وأشهد أنك وفيت بعهد الله وجاهدت في سبيله حتى أتاك اليقين، فلعن الله من قتلك ولعن الله من ظلمك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. اللهم إني أشهدك أني ولي لمن والاه وعدو لمن عاداه، بأبي أنت وأمي يا ابن رسول الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك مدلهمات من ثيابها، وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المسلمين ومعقل المؤمنين، وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي، وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا، وأشهد أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن، بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع، ونصرتي لكم معدة حتى يأذن الله لكم، فمعكم لا مع عدوكم. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وأجسادكم وشاهدكم وغائبكم وظاهركم وباطنكم، آمين رب العالمين. السلام عليك وعلى جدك المصطفى، السلام عليك وعلى جدتك خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك وعلى أبيك المرتضى، السلام عليك وعلى أمك المظلومة الزهراء، السلام عليك وعلى أخيك المجتبى، السلام على التسعة المعصومين من بنيك، ولا سيما صاحب العصر والزمان الحجة المهدي المنتظر عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمامنا إمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل مخرجك وجعلنا من شيعتك وأنصارك ومن المستشهدين بين يديك. السلام عليكم جميعا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين ورحمة الله وبركاته. مؤمنين ومؤمنات, in this Mubarak night with the Shafa'a of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, let us recite 5 times أمن يجب المضطر for إرسال الثواب for أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات عن شفاء المرضى وقضاء الحوائج. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 يا الله.
اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وجليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.
Mu'mineen, could I please kindly request you to take your seats and follow the instructions of the volunteers with regards to leaving the centre in a safe manner. Mu'mineen, once again, I'd like to just take this opportunity to, on behalf of the Executive Committee and the Mu'mineen of Wessex Jamaat, to express our gratitude to Sheikh Hasnain Govani for honouring us with his Majlis over these last few nights. All of the Mu'mineen have found this very, very useful. We've learned lots from your words, both on the member and off the member, and speaking to the various members of the community as well. So once again, on behalf of the community, we'd like to express our gratitude. Can I ask all the mu'mineen to join me once again in the recitation of 3 salawat as an expression of our gratitude to Sheikh Hasnain, with loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We very much look forward to having the honour to host you once again, inshallah. Can I ask Mu'mineen that we end the programme with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha for all Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, and Fatiha.